Good evening, everybody. Welcome into the Villanova Basketball Report. It's live here on BLS. Bob Long, we have Tom Trainer here and Kevin Long alongside as well. And we got a great one for you tonight, folks, because it becomes, well, and you get into the middle of a conference schedule like this, guys, it becomes very much a grind. And I think Villanova is in no different a position right now. A top 10 matchup at home against a very good Xavier team. They take care of business there. Then you go up to Madison Square Garden, a building where you should be able to get up for, and certainly a team, a program historically that you should be able to get up for. But a very athletic and long St. John's team gives them a lot of problems. Then all of a sudden you play another historical power in Georgetown, who doesn't quite have the team that they've had, say, 10, 12 years ago when they were in their heyday. And then after that, you're going to go play another traditional rival in UCONN. So, between the new rival, who's the number 10 team in the country, and then some of the old-time rivals, all of a sudden you're looking in 2 weeks, really 4 games, each of them with their intriguing storylines on all sides, and they're the number 1 team in the country. Everybody's coming for them. So I find where we are right now, and it's good night to talk about it, very, very interesting in terms of the Villanova season going forward.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why the Big East Conference is well respected around the nation, and it's not a huge conference, but there are a lot of really good teams up and down this conference. Possibly one of the deepest conferences this year, except for maybe a Big 12 or something like that. But there's going to be a lot of teams from this conference in the tournament, probably 6, 7 teams. So any given night, you're playing a very, very good team, and you always got to bring it. Even if you're playing someone like a St. John's, they'll be on the border this year. Don't see them quite making it, but you're always going to have a tough battle in this conference every night.
The Xavier game, Chris Mack loves to call the Xavier game at Villanova their annual butt whooping. He uses a different 3-letter word that I will not use on Bob Long Sports, and it was everything and more. It was that, all that, and more. It was total domination by the Wildcats. The story in Madison Square Garden on Saturday night, a little bit different, a little sloppy at times, as you said. Credit the St. John's defense, created a lot of havoc and length. Villanova struggled at times, but as you watch top team after top team go down every week, we had 2 and 4 go down this weekend, Michigan State and West Virginia, and Villanova keeps getting through this tough Big East Conference unscathed. Nobody else deserves to be number 1 but the Villanova Wildcats.
The Villanova Wildcats, as you said, the number 1 team in the country, and this is the Villanova Basketball Report. It's live here on BLS. Bob Long, Tom Trainer, Kevin Long alongside. Now, when we break down both the Xavier game and the St. John's game, I find that they're very interesting for different reasons. And the Xavier game specifically, besides maybe a player on that Xavier team, I felt that while they're a really well-coached team and Chris Mack gets them up to play and they're a very consistent team, you would think, besides that game, we'll say, Villanova, I thought, out-athletic, I'll make up a word, them in that game. And so as a result, you have 2 well-coached teams, but Villanova can just stretch the floor better, they can finish better, and they can deny at the rim to some extent better. Against St. John's, I still think they're a more disciplined team, although it may not have shown it because St. John's plays phenomenal defense both in the half court and when they choose to pick up full court, eliciting far too many turnovers from Villanova's perspective, well in excess of what they do on a game-to-game basis. In addition, Owens at the rim, I thought, provided a huge presence for St. John's that Xavier did not really have, to the point where you see Mikal Bridges, a guy who's as athletic, slashing to the basket as anybody in the country. Now all of a sudden he's pump faking when he gets to the base of the lane or when he gets into the middle of the floor. That's not where you would see him pump faking, for example, against Gonzaga when he brought the house down in the very same building that Villanova was taking to the brink against St. John's. I mean, really, when I say to the brink, I mean to the brink, right? There's that call at the end of the game where Bridges goes over the top of Pons. Pons is just standing there, and he goes down to the floor. Clearly, either no call or an offensive, we'll say, over-the-back foul against Mikal Bridges. Loose ball foul would have sent Pons to the line, down 4, an opportunity to cut it to 1 possession with more than a shot clock remaining on the game clock. So it really was down to the wire. And obviously you give Shamori Pons a lot of credit, but I think St. John's, from a defensive perspective, got in the head of Villanova, and that call was big. I also think in the first half, Justin Simon runs into Phil Booth in the lane. Phil Booth, left foot, clearly in the area. Just wasn't seen. Pat Driscoll missed the call. That was Justin Simon's second foul. He had to sit for a good portion of the first half. So when you see a 7-point game, I want Villanova fans to understand that St. John's played punch for punch with a couple calls that did not go their direction.
Right, and that game was 8 to 10 points for a while, and Villanova couldn't get away. It was one of those games you could tell who the better team is, but Villanova couldn't get the edge, couldn't get away, and it was because of the turnovers, as you mentioned. Villanova had 17 turnovers in that game. They're averaging 10 on the season, and it was the opposite in the Xavier game where they forced 15 Xavier turnovers to Villanova's 8. And then also defensively, you mentioned Shamori Pons going off for 37 points in the St. John's game, and it was the opposite story in the Xavier game where Villanova essentially played, I forget what your word or your phrase was, you said out-athletic them?
Yeah, thank you.
I'd say the defensive execution was what was on point in that game, because they essentially said, hey, we're going to make anybody but Trayvon Blewett and J.P. McCura beat us. And as you saw, Blewett only went for 11 points. McCura was held to just 5 and was clearly frustrated all game long. And then Cantor, kind of an unsung guy on that team, ends up being the leading scorer with, I think, about 16 points. So in that game, defensively, Wildcats, after 3 games of giving up, 90 points, about an average of 92, 93-ish points in the previous 3 games against DePaul, Butler, and even against Marquette, finally, defensively, found themselves much more solid, and clearly the game plan worked. And against St. John's, the defense was solid again. Shamori Pons is St. John's. Unfortunately for them, they have a short bench at the moment, dealing with some injuries and other things. But defensively, the Xavier game was great, and then the turnovers and the sloppiness, but credit St. John's on Saturday night.
Yeah, and for me, going back to the Xavier game, some of our keys to that game, as you guys remember from last week's show, was, 1, get Phil Booth going. Did that, 21 points, had a great game, really did well shooting the ball that night, and stopped Trayvon Blewett and J.P. McCura. They combined for 16 points total. I think I said hold them under 30 points, and they did more than that. And, they won this game running away with it. So, Tom and I, we thought this was going to be a little bit closer. Bob ended up being the closer one on that. I was a little surprised when the line came out last week, but I guess they knew something. Villanova played a really, really good game, really sound defensively, really showed why they're the best team in the Big East right now. And as for St. John's, Phil Booth, again, struggled in that game. He sort of seems back and forth this year. I don't know if he's still dealing with a knee injury. So some nights he sort of has it, some nights he doesn't. That's a little bit concerning to me. I think we need him to be a guy. It seems not that we go as Phil goes, but when he has a good game, we seem to do much better as a team. I think a lot of guys look to him as a leader, and they look to him to get the offense going at times. But Dante DiVincenzo was a guy who really stepped up in this game. If it weren't for him, you don't even know if you end up winning this game. He hits a lot of clutch shots for this team. Every time St. John seems to be creeping back, he hits a few shots here and there. He really kept us in this game. Again, the defense needs to improve a little bit. As you mentioned, Shamori Pons, he basically tore us apart in that game. So definitely need to lock down on key guys like that.
On the ball defense.
On the ball.
Been saying it all year.
Tom, did you hear the word? He's the key word that Kev said there. Did you hear it?
Yeah.
What was the word?
It was 101.
No, it was. He said the word clutch on Bob Long Sports.
Oh,
man, that's a no-no.
I'll take a lap.
That's a no-no.
I'll let you guys.
Some very timely shots, though. I'll give you that.
I'll let you guys
shots.
talk that out off air.
I will issue my apology later on Bob Long Sports.
We'll spare the viewers of a Bob Long rant or preaching moment. We won't get into that.
BLR.
Yes.
Bob Long rants.
But I wanted to say that I love that we're talking about Phil Booth and Dante DiVincenzo. We have yet to mention guys like Jalen Brunson, Amari Spellman, Mikal Bridges, and yet the Wildcats went through a week where they beat a top 10 team in the country and also beat St. John's in Madison Square Garden, which is always tough. And St. John's fans showed out for that game. There was a very good crowd. It seemed to be at the Garden. They were loud, especially late in the games. They were getting back into it. But it's great when you're talking about the stars in those games. You know, maybe your third or fourth option on offense, and then the sixth man going off for 20-plus points, both those guys individually in separate games. So it's great where you know, Villanova as a team, Jalen Brunson is almost always going to be solid, right? But then if Mikal or Omari are off, you always have guys. You have Phil, you have Dante to step up, and Eric, who has finally found his shot.
Yeah,
looking pretty good. It's great to see him having the confidence too, and it's just great. All of the weapons they have, even though they have are dealing with a short bench. I saw a report Gillespie might be back within a week. I don't know if that's wishful thinking, but even with the short bench, they still have more than enough weapons.
Is that a good thing? Is that a good thing that Gillespie is back, or would you rather him? Would you rather take the long view and say this is a guy who's going to get bigger and stronger under Shackelford and in the strength program? Let's give him a fresh start. Again, I don't know if there's a guarantee that he would have a red shirt, so that might be some of the thinking behind that. But let's say you were assured a red shirt. Would you bring Collin Gillespie back, or would you not? All that also to say that you can't just hold a guy out without showing that he was physically unable to play, and it still is only mid-January. So I've caveated the hell out of that, but let's just say you had the opportunity to get him a red shirt. Would you, or would you bring him back right now?
I think you bring him back. Absolutely. I mean, right now we're pretty thin. You know, you really have a 6 to 7 man rotation. We were just discussing this before
Where
the show.
does the 6-man rotation come from? Can someone help me with that?
Well, I think there's quite
it's
a distinction.
clearly been a 7-man rotation. I think it's
People
disrespectful to Demir.
say 6.
That's disrespectful.
There's two levels here. Demir is in a class of his own. I think you look at the top
in a
6,
good way or a bad way, because if you're not counting him as being in the rotation, that sounds like
in a medium
totally
kind of way.
dissing
He's
it.
in the rotation, but he's not.
Demir Cosby-Roundtree is playing 12.5 minutes a game.
Okay.
That's over a quarter of each
How many
game.
minutes a game is Dante DiVincenzo playing?
DiVincenzo's playing 20.
He's playing starters, man.
Yeah,
So you
but
have
the third highest on the team. Kev.
Right. Okay, but all right. So who's the 6th highest?
The 6th highest is Omari with. Actually, the 6th highest is Collin Gillespie with 13. So if he were still with the team, would you still say
No. It's Omari.
7?
Omari.
So then, sorry,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is, Demir is actually 8th. Gillespie was playing 13.2 before he left. Hold on. Would you have said that Collin Gillespie is not part of the rotation because they're less than a minute different?
I would say that Collin and Demir are in a class by themselves. There's essentially 6 starters, if you will.
I'll give you that.
Who play 25 minutes a game.
I'll give you that.
And then, Demir, Collin, 13, 12 minutes a game. That's sort of a...
Is it a 6-man rotation or a 7-man rotation?
They're role players. They're role players.
I agree.
Versus...
Wholeheartedly.
Are they in the rotation? I mean, that's...
As Bob just showed you, they're both playing, averaging more than a quarter of each game.
Here, I'll give you this.
Also, hold up. I want to say, would you not say that you see value in? So go back to 2016. Mikal Bridges was just a role player, a guy who probably played the same amount of minutes at this point in the season in the 2015-2016 campaign.
I'd even say Jermaine Samuels at 7 minutes a game is technically in the rotation when he's healthy.
And when you get to the end of 2016 and a guy like Mikal Bridges, who I think at this point that's where Demir is at this point, I think is a similar spot, and where he could be at the end of the season is so much different. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's almost partly to your point, but they're still in the rotation at this point. I don't want to undervalue those guys at all.
Right. Okay, so I guess in the rotation, sure, I'll give you in the rotation, but
beautiful.
There is a clear
that was the only thing we were arguing.
Top 6.
I'll give you that.
Okay.
I see 6-man rotation all the time. That's all I'm saying, and I don't know where it comes from.
That's where it comes from. There's a clear distinction between the top 6 and the rest of the team.
You're
that's
exactly
where it
right.
comes from.
You're exactly right.
That's what it is.
But
there is. There's
so
a
maybe
clear
it's not the right term. Maybe it's not the right terminology. I'll give you that.
Yeah, sure. But listen, when we talk about 7-man rotation as well versus 6 versus 8 versus 9, right? There have been teams that have won national championships with 7-man rotations. And I get it, right? There are writers out there, some of them really good, that we're going to have on in the next couple of weeks, that when they write, they talk about, they have something to talk about, and they have to get something out there. If they're a Villanova beat writer, there's only so many opportunities to get in front of the team. And so naturally, a question is elicited. Is a 7-man rotation too thin? Can a team with only 2 guys coming off the bench with regularity, can they be fresh enough in March to win in early April? And we've seen it time and time again. Some of the Kentucky teams, even some of the Villanova teams, granted that maybe didn't make the run all the way, were only 7 deep, but I'd argue that it wasn't that was the issue in those particular games. It was either matchups or just not playing well on a particular afternoon. I mean, there are some really good Nova teams that didn't go 8 deep consistently, and there are some teams historically that were very successful with 7-man rotations, especially with the role playing that Villanova has, where you can have guys play different types of positions at any given time. So that doesn't worry me whatsoever when I take a look at the 7 versus 8-man rotation. But it's something you're going to hear about as January turns into February, and then you get into the Big East tournament.
So because you're not worried about it, that's why it sounds to me like you were alluding to. So you seem to be questioning at least the wisdom of bringing Gillespie back, right? That was at least a question you were raising, but I wasn't sure where exactly you stood on that. Because my answer is, well, to both questions. So yes, you bring Gillespie back, and that's because while, yes, you can win a national championship with a 7-man rotation, having 8 sure helps. And having an 8th man who was shooting above 42% from 3 before, and it's a small sample size, but nonetheless, the first 9 games of the season was shooting 42% from 3 is a good free throw shooter. He's that guy that if, heaven forbid, Jalen and Phil, one or both were ever to get in foul trouble in key situations in the Big East tournament, in the NCAA tournament, he's a guy that can come in, he can take care of the basketball, he can be that player that isn't going to make mistakes. He'll play solid defense. He'll shoot the ball well. He's a smart player, and I think he showed that.
Yeah.
He showed that in high school, and he showed that in the first 9 games he's played this season so far.
Well, going back to what you said, was that what I was saying? Not really. That's not exactly what I was saying. But it's a good point you make, Tom. But what I see there, the reason I talk about Gillespie and whether he should come back, is simply because I'm long dating the question. At the end of the day, where is the additional value, the incremental value on a unit-by-unit basis of Collin Gillespie being on the floor? This year for 2 months, or 4 to the 5th year from now, where he's the starter, where he's the Ryan Arcidiacono, where he's the Jalen Brunson of the team, where he's the flat-out leader. And so do I think that Collin Gillespie can be the difference between a national championship this year or not? In theory, he could, if there's a specific situation there. And would you want him to be on the floor? I would say yes. There's no way you can guarantee that, though. So if I'm thinking maximum utility for a guy, for a program that almost certainly is going to be at the top, not just this year, not just next year, but for the foreseeable future, if you can get him that full year off like Omari Spellman did last year, would it have been great to have Spellman on the floor? 100%. Would it have been the difference between a national championship and not? I don't know. Maybe. I think they would have beaten Wisconsin. But at the end of the day, all else equal, for the go-forward mentality and for the go-forward success of this program, I don't think it was a bad thing that Spellman sat out the entire year last year, even though he could have helped. So, I mean, at the end of the day, guys, that's sort of my thought on the Gillespie thing.
So where does it end, though? So we talked about it last year with Phil Booth and Omari Spellman, and nothing you do about Omari, but we talked about Phil Booth. If he had been healthy enough, we both agreed that it would not have been smart to bring Phil back, right?
I agree.
So when does that end? Now you're sort of, now you're cannibalizing this year for 4 years from now, and then someone gets hurt next year, and you never win a national championship because you keep sitting these guys out, and you never have your full team that you recruited for, you stacked for, armed and ready to go, and then you never actually win that national championship. Now, he's going to have a better year if he's a 5th-year senior than this year right now, absolutely. But, when does it end for them? When
a
is the
great
best question? When is the best time to go for that run? And who knows, we're recruiting very well right now, but who knows what Villanova basketball looks like in 4 years from now?
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly why it's a great point. And for the folks out there, by the way, watching, we're live on Periscope. You can tweet us. We're live on Facebook. You can comment. I mean, what is your thought? If you're following the team, or even if you're not, you have a young freshman. He's a guard, so he adjusted the game fairly well. If you have, he's been out for what, a month now, so you also have to take into account what his form will be when he comes back. Do you sit him out for the rest of the year? Again, assuming you can get that red shirt, which is just an incorrect or incomplete assumption at this point. We don't know that, especially since there's so much more time left in the year. You would need to prove to the NCAA that he was essentially unable to play for the entire second half of the season. So with all that in mind, it might be a moot discussion, but I'm more of a long-dated guy. I would much rather have 7 to 8 years of consistent success than, say, one run to a Final Four and then you drop off the face of the earth. And I think the gut reaction in people would say the opposite until they're part of that 7 years where things don't mean anything. And I'm not saying that where Villanova would be. It's more of an existential question.
Well, I wanted to make the point to comparing this to last year or the year prior with DiVincenzo. It's sort of apples and oranges and difficult to compare because last year you didn't have the option. There was no option with Phil Booth or with Omari Spellman. And I think if you could have either one of those guys last year, you do that in a heartbeat. The year prior, you didn't need Dante DiVincenzo. Their team was deep enough, which they showed in that run in the NCAA tournament, one of the greatest runs of all time through the tournament. And this year, I think it's a different situation where you both need Gillespie, and it looks like, fortunately, they will at least have the option to play him or not if they want.
So you think they need Gillespie to do what?
I think they need Gillespie.
The difference between what and what?
We talked about it last week. It might not be something that's hurting the team now or something that we're noticing at this point in time, but as the season goes on, as you go through the Big East Conference, guys playing a 6.5, 7-man rotation, that'll wear on you. I think that wore on them last year more than they maybe let on. And I think it's hard. I mean, basketball is it is a difficult sport, even just playing 2 games a week, let alone getting to the Big East tournament and the NCAA tournament, playing back-to-back days or playing every other day on the weekends. And at the end, especially the biggest games being at the end of the season, having time. So if he is ready for next week or the week after, having time now to bring him back into the rotation at this point in the season where you still have more than half of your Big East regular season left is huge for letting other guys to be able to rest their legs a little bit. And also, we haven't seen a game yet without him that I can remember where foul trouble has been an issue. So we haven't seen a game yet, because I believe it was the Tennessee game in the Bahamas where Jalen got in foul trouble. Some of the other guards were in foul trouble. Everybody was in foul trouble in that game. And that's where that could have been an issue, but Gillespie was still playing at that point. So I think we haven't seen yet the real impact that missing Gillespie has.
The only thing there, and it's a fine point about foul trouble, and I totally understand. Where you're loading up, though, is the point where you already have, I wouldn't say the most depth, but in terms of you may have equal depth in the backcourt as you do in the front court, and clearly, year over year, game after game, you're going to have, on average, more fouls by the guys in the front court. So if you had another Omari Spellman, well, that would be great. But even if you had another Eric Paschal, right, coming off the bench, that might be a little more helpful than Collin Gillespie.
Right.
Then again, having a freshman guard might be better than having a freshman big, because the bigs, at least in Villanova's case, and really nationally as well, take longer to get developed than do guards. A lot of times, Collin Gillespie ran the point in high school, as did Jalen Brunson, as did Phil Booth, as did Ryan Arcidiacono. These guys came in more ready to play than bigs because bigs were guys that were just dominating physically in high school, did not always see the competition. You know, Jared Sullinger comes to Ohio State, and he didn't always see Juwan Johnson from Purdue, right? I mean, like when he comes in as a freshman, it can be a little bit longer for some of the big guys to develop. So while I say for Villanova right now, from a foul trouble perspective, it might be better to have a big man. If you're limiting the discussion to a freshman, I think it's important or probably more helpful to have a guard, which obviously is what you have in Gillespie. I think we are going to see him, so I think the debate will be somewhat moot, but I do find it to be a very interesting discussion of that mindset and that mentality.
I do want to point to a Twitter comment we have from Jack McGee, JMcGee17. How's it going, Jack? Good to hear from you. He said, great show, fellas, and sort of asking to the point that I was just making. He said, would you suggest Jay maybe manage the minutes of some of the guys to help avoid wear and tear in March? And that's that is the point that I was making in that last bit there. And I also wanted to say that you were bringing up sort of a different discussion in my mind. And if you asked does the Villanova need right now? So if you said they could get an eighth man in the rotation, and what do they need? You would say a big man, right? You would, and you would say, and you were talking about the development. That's the issue. I mean, a guy like Tim Delaney, there's nothing you. I mean, he's just had a bad break, a bunch of injuries and hip surgeries, multiple hip surgeries, and so there's no problem with his development being behind.
In fairness, even since he's come in, and this is not Dylan Painter and it's not Tim Delaney's fault, they've just, even in the last 3 years, have recruited a different class of athlete than when those guys came in. And right now, they just don't fit. They just don't have a place, and it's unfortunate. Clearly, the 2 hip injuries for Tim Delaney was a big issue, and I don't think we'll ever know how much of a factor that really was. Would he have been ready and willing to play? Would he be an active participant in this team if his hips never got hurt? I don't think that's a slam dunk yes, to be quite honest with you. But that happening certainly limited that chance.
Right. Well, and I think it's no question that he'd at least be further along and we'd be more of a participant and an impact player on the team,
right,
for sure. In what capacity, I don't know, but it would definitely be better.
Good stuff coming on Facebook here, guys. Chris Mugler coming in and saying he's a guy that says go for it right now, which doesn't surprise me. He's a common commenter on this game, but I just know, having chatted with him in the past, and that makes sense, right? That's kind of his mentality, his mindset. Rather go for it all at once, and if it doesn't happen for whatever reason because you laid all your cards on the table, at least you can sleep at night. My thought there is you better win, otherwise it doesn't feel so good.
So here's a question for you guys. Does the status of Jermaine Samuels change your answer at all whatsoever? Now, guy who's unknown, unproven. He's had one good game right before he got injured. We don't even know what he would be if he came back. And, the injury happened after Collin Gillespie. From what we hear, it's the same exact injury. So he'll be on track to return after Collin, making the decision even more difficult. But does that change your decision at all?
Your question is if Jermaine was healthy now or what his status will be.
Let's say Jermaine is slated to come back exactly a week after Collin is ready to come back. So you hold him out for that week, and you're ready to bring Jermaine back. He's that additional depth guy. He's another guard, but obviously a different type of guard than Collin. Does that change your answer at all?
Well, and is it possible? It's probably not likely or even possible for Jermaine to be redshirted at this point, right? He played all the way into Big East play.
From what I've heard, it's too late for him at this point.
I agree.
He's done. He's
right.
gonna.
So he would be coming back regardless, as soon as you can get him back.
Exactly.
Right.
So you bring him back no matter what. But does that change your answer on Collin Gillespie?
Not really for me, to be honest with you, because they're different positions. And Collin is going to come back, it appears. Does it change my answer? Probably not. I just happen to think that if he sat out and he was a redshirt freshman next year, coming in with the crop they have, Cole Swider comes in. They really don't have that pure guard yet. He would be much better than he is even now, and I think would come in. Let's say they lose Let's say they lose Jalen Brunson. He'll likely be a starting guard alongside Phil Booth in his senior year. And he still might be anyway, but I think having him for the full 4 years, pretty much hit the reset button, would, in a perfect world, be phenomenal. And it's a good point that Mike Krause brought up here, Mike K getting into the discussion, and doesn't the initial question we posed about redshirt versus throw him in there, lose a year at the end, quote unquote, go for it now. He says, doesn't that depend on their recruiting class coming in? They're a top team in the country every year, so they are getting talent year after year. And that's absolutely true. But I think Omari Spellman staying for 5 years versus 4, which, by the way, might not happen when this is all said and done. I think Collin Gillespie is a little bit more likely to stay for all 4 years.
Right.
You know, more along the lines of a Phil Booth, of a Ryan Archidiakono, et cetera, versus even a Daniel Ochefu who had an opportunity to leave after his junior year, and Spellman, who I think will have those same opportunities as a big. I just think you're going to have a more complete 4-year career if instead of playing half a year and coming back after a broken wrist as a shooter, maybe you just take the rest of the time off and start over. And that's what it comes down to. Plus the fact that, and this is a good point that Mike brings up to this point, they haven't recruited a true point guard yet in the next class.
I just one last bit about this. I did want to answer your question. I bring back Gillespie either way, just because I think he's a really good player. I think he's somebody that could be very useful this year. I think if we're talking about Jermaine Samuel's potential or what he showed to potentially develop, I think there's even more potential that we haven't seen from Collin Gillespie, and he's somebody which I think is scary in a good way to think about. He's a kid, that was a late bloomer in high school, was the city player of the year last year, and I think is somebody who came in ready to play this year, and like I said, I think even has more under the surface, even more so, believe it or not, than a Jermaine Samuels, which makes me really exciting, but makes me also want to see what he could do for the Cats during the remainder of this season.
And to Mike's point, I think you trust your recruiting as well. I think we've seen a large improvement in the past few years just after winning a national championship. Been recruiting, top 5, top 10 classes. I think you can trust that you're going to backfill, with more guys that can do the job. You trust that, even if Collin is gone in 4 years, you'll be able to find another guy that can fill that role.
Yeah, so it does look like Collin Gillespie is coming back. It could be very shortly. One note, you said the high school career, we always tip back to this, and we can because we're right here in Philadelphia. Collin Gillespie, an Archbishop Wood graduate, and of course, we do a lot with high school basketball here in Philadelphia. The way his Wood team is playing this year, and it's still a very good basketball team, but already they're nowhere near the middle of the pack in the Catholic League, but they don't appear head and shoulders above the rest of the league, not named Newman Goretti, the way they were last year. And I think that speaks to how good a player Gillespie is, because they still have 4 Division I players on that team. That also speaks to the talent of the Catholic League, if I may.
It speaks to the leadership that Collin brought. That's the type of guy that Jay likes. He brings in guys with that attitude, with that leadership. And I think that Collin brought a lot of that to his team, despite a lot of good players on that Archbishop Wood team. You need a good leader, bring you guys together, play together as a team, and I think Collin provided a lot of that and can do so for the next couple of years here at Nova.
All right, we'll move on, but I do find it funny, some of the comments rolling in. We appreciate it on Facebook and on Twitter. You can get at us at Bob Long Sports. I should have known, asking this question to Philadelphia sports fans, and I mean that with all the respect in the world, because they've gone through now the Phillies, and clearly the Sixers has been a long process. The Flyers, I don't know if they're in the midst of a process, a rebuild, whatever that might be, but a hashtag came in, hashtag Longview works for the Sixers only. So everybody else needs to go for it right now. And Mike K also saying he's always a supporter of the young guys because he wants the Phillies to continue to bring up their young prospects. Perhaps deal an outfielder, whether that's Odubel Herrera or Aaron Altair, whoever that might be, in order to get some pitching into the organization. But anyways, that's good discussion there. So, Tom, I think this might be a good time to go to our pick'em, do you think?
Sure, we can go to the pick'em, or do you want to preview the games for this week?
Pick one.
Let's go to the pick'em.
All right,
It's
pick
what-
'em, pick 'em.
Let's be honest. That's what the fans are all waiting for.
Give the
Anyway,
people what they
it's a
want.
little brotherly rivalry.
Yeah. So we have a weekly game here where we pick 3 games against the spread. Fun point system designed by Tom himself. If you pick an underdog, then you get plus 10 as well as the differential between the line and the final score. If for whatever reason you choose a favorite and that favorite goes down, that is a minus 10. And then you also take the differential between that line and the loss by that team as well. Tom, how am I doing so far?
Well, Kevin's glad you asked. So last week, Bob's first pick was, well, actually, all of Bob's picks were
Bad.
games that already had lines. You said it, not me. All were smart picks, games that already had lines. I believe you've done something similar this week. Again, because college basketball spreads only come out within 2 days of the game. So if you're picking something, as Kevin has been lucky with so far, further on, closer to the weekend or on the weekend, you have to just go with whatever the line ends up being come game time. Last week, Bob picked the Tennessee Volunteers as a 2-point favorite over Vanderbilt. That was a good pick for Bob, as the Volunteers beat Vandy 92-84. So Bob got 6 points out of that game. And then this was actually a really smart pick. So Bob picked a really interesting pick as well. Bob picked Indiana over Penn State when Penn State was a 1-point favorite. So Bob made his pick early in the afternoon when Penn State was still a 1-point favorite. Come game time, Indiana was a 1-point favorite. So I don't know. It sounds like Bob knew something that Vegas knew as well. And
Thank you.
it was a good pick, as I said. Indiana goes on to win 74-70. I know that is bittersweet for Bob as a Penn State alum, because I know there was a bit of a heartbreaker for the Nittany Lions, but Bob did get 15 points, out of that one, thanks to Indiana winning as an underdog at the time Bob had picked the game. And then Bob's final game for the week, his Big East game, Seton Hall was a 1-point favorite over Marquette, and Bob picked Seton Hall to cover the spread, which, as any of you who saw that game last week, they did not. Marquette stayed scorching red hot, dropped 84 on the Pirates to their 64, and Bob ended up with a negative 31 points from that game, leaving Bob with, what is that for the week? I had to hear some. Oh, yes, leaving Bob with negative 10 for the week. Kevin, who entered the week in the lead, went with a Big 12 battle for his first pick, West Virginia, a 10-point favorite over Baylor. Kevin picked the Mountaineers to cover the spread, which they did not. They barely squeaked that one out. That was a close one for West Virginia, 57-54 over the Bears from Baylor. So it was negative 7 points for Kevin. And then he went with Auburn to cover an 11-point spread over Ole Miss. That was a good pick. The Tigers won against the Running Rebels 85 to 70. So 4 points for Kevin on that one. And then Kevin also went with Seton Hall Pirates, but in their other game of the week over the Georgetown Hoyas, they were a 12-point favorite. And they went on to win by 13 this past weekend, 74-61, so +1 for Kevin. He was in negative figures for the week due to that West Virginia-Baylor game, -2 for the week for Kev, but still maintains his lead on Bob, gains 8 points from the past week, and as we currently stand, coming into this week, Kevin has 30.5 points to Bob's negative 18.5 points.
Better if I hadn't been born.
So, wow.
Or just hadn't made a pick.
That escalated quickly. So, Bob, coming into this week, how are you starting your comeback?
Can I just abstain? Maybe just hope for Kevin to give away?
That's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to stay put.
All right.
Trying to stay at 30.
Well, I'm sensing a big one here tonight. So, starting off with UCF +7.5 over Cincinnati. They were up big early. Now, I made this pick about 3 o'clock today, and now transcribing it here over the air. Right now, it's a 6-point game. Last I checked, mid-second half, but I took a look at this one and I said Cincinnati doesn't really score all that much. UCF has had some good games, a defeat of UConn. I thought it was a pretty good opportunity. I took a shot, certainly, but UCF at least hanging in a little better than Seton Hall did last year. Dayton, tomorrow, the Flyers play St. Joe's on the road in Philadelphia, but St. Joe's is a 1.5-point favorite. So I like Dayton in that game. Playing pretty well, blew out, and were red hot in their last game. I think they're going to continue to play well, and this time blow out St. Joe's. I like Seton Hall to beat Creighton. I can't believe I'm going back to the well, Kev.
That sounded painful. It doesn't sound like you really like them to beat them.
Seton Hall's +5. I don't see. I don't know. They don't play.
At least you're going with Seton Hall as an underdog this time.
They don't play well on the road, as shown by, well, a lot of things. The Rutgers game, the Marquette game was at Marquette. Yeah, that's right. So road games, Rutgers, Marquette, they've really struggled. So it pains me, but I thought I saw an opportunity there. Kev?
So my first pick for this week, I have Oklahoma -2 over Kansas State. We talked about him last week. Trae Young, best player in the country right now, really playing outstanding basketball. Kansas State had a very good game this week with Kansas, so I think the line skewed partially because of that. I saw an opportunity there. I think Oklahoma rolls over Kansas State. I think they'll cover that by more than 2. My second pick, Auburn -1.5 over Alabama. I went with Auburn last week. I just like this team. They're playing really good basketball right now, playing really fast, making a lot of shots. It's a really, really good team. I trust them. Probably going to roll with them for a while this season until someone wakes up on them.
Yeah, Jared Harper, your boy there.
Absolutely. So my final game, my Big East game, is Villanova -13.5 over Georgetown. Didn't have a whole lot of games this week to choose from. I could have gone with the Saturday games. Didn't want to risk it. Didn't see a whole lot of great matchups there. So I went with one where we have a line. The Villanova team playing really well right now. Georgetown team that's struggling a little bit. I think Villanova wins easily, even by more than 13.5 there.
So what I'm hearing is that Bob has a big opportunity to get back in the thick of it this week, as Kevin has picked all favorites to cover, and Bob has picked all underdogs. So a bit of an opportunity here
until
for Bob.
Bob can prove to get above that 0 line. I'm just going to try to stay pat, let him come to me,
Well, Kev, I have to question things. I believe your comment was that you were just trying to play it safe and just
absolutely
keep it where it's at. Well, picking, Oklahoma, I think that's a good pick, but still, just a 2-point favorite, and Auburn, just a 1.5-point favorite. Those games seem like they could be risky picks. It is Oklahoma, Trae Young, road games in the Big 12 for Oklahoma. It's always tough.
Absolutely. I see what you're saying there. I just like those lines. I like those teams. Oklahoma and Auburn are 2 of my favorite teams this year. I just see those teams rolling. I see those lines as a little bit low, trying to stay pat, get maybe 10 points if they win by, 12 to 15 points. I think it's a pretty good week.
And we will get to that Villanova-Georgetown game in a couple minutes here, but that Auburn-Alabama game is a nice segue into our other fun pick'em challenge, which we've been doing all year, is us versus the fans. This past week, we had Texas and TCU. The Longhorns were a 1-point favorite against TCU, and what a game that was. That was a game, Texas, unfortunately, playing with heavy hearts, inspired basketball. After star guard Andrew Jones was diagnosed with leukemia earlier in the week, and it was a double overtime game, a great game. Jalen Fisher with a chance to go coast to coast at the end in double overtime and missed the layup, and Shaka Smart's team survived. So I picked the Longhorns. If I remember correctly, Kevin picked the Longhorns as well. Bob?
I didn't. I like TCU.
That's a shame.
You guys really got me there. 1-point game winning.
So wait, wasn't this a push? Wasn't the line?
It was a push.
It was
yeah.
a push,
Okay,
but our
okay.
team won the game. and so that's
Yeah.
the most important thing first and foremost.
Not on BLS here.
Clearly, I'm not much of a betting man. So,
Kevin, it's the most important.
So, moving on to this week, our game is that Iron Bowl on the court that Kevin mentioned earlier in his picks for this week, Auburn at Alabama. Bob, who do you like in that game?
I think I do like Auburn, to be honest with you, but just to make it fun, because Kevin's so confident about his Auburn boys, let me make the argument that I don't understand why the line is where it is. You know, Alabama is struggling. They have 6 or 7 losses on the year. They do have Collin Sexton, and he's been a phenomenal player this year, and he'll be there for 1 year, and then he'll promptly go to the NBA, almost certainly, as a lottery pick. So let's say he goes off and keeps our boy Harper in check. Guard-on-guard matchup. Maybe the SEC Player of the Year as of January the 16th maybe doesn't have his best game. Let's go Alabama for the heck of it because that line is way too tight.
Like I said before, my pick 'em, sticking with Auburn. I like these guys. They've been playing well recently. A lot of good wins over Tennessee and Arkansas a couple weeks ago. I think they continue to roll. I think they cover the spread easily.
Yeah, Kevin seems to know what he's doing. I like Kevin's pick. That's a good pick. I'm going to go War Eagle. Auburn survives.
Okay. So you have a trivia question, though, do you not, for us?
Yeah, I do have a trivia question. So our weekly trivia question leading into our discussion about Villanova's upcoming games for this week against Georgetown tomorrow night at 6:30, as you see on the board behind me. And then on Saturday at high noon, back against an old Big East foe in Connecticut, the Connecticut Huskies. That'll be a good test for the Villanova Wildcats against an American Athletic Conference team that is honestly, I think, surprisingly struggling at this point in the season.
I agree with that.
But as I mentioned, those UConn Huskies are an old Big East foe. So, and Georgetown, as we know, is also an original Big East foe, and we are happy to still have them in the current Big East. So, without further ado, our trivia question, actually, we have 2 parts to this question, or we have a bonus question, I should say. So, Villanova is going to play 2 original Big East rivals this coming week, starting with Georgetown tomorrow and UConn on Saturday. Thinking of the other 5, so 7 original Big East programs. First part is, if you want to answer this question, you have to remember what those programs are, which I hope both of you can do. But the question is, against which original Big East team of the 7 original Big East schools does Villanova have the best winning percentage? And if you can, the closest guess to that winning percentage is bonus points.
Oh, wow!
Wait,
The original 7, right?
The original 7.
Seton Hall, Providence, St. John's, Georgetown, Villanova, Connecticut, Syracuse.
How many did you name? Was that 6?
7, I believe.
You named 7?
Let's do this one more time.
All right, so
Villanova, Georgetown, St. John's, Providence, Seton Hall, Connecticut, Syracuse.
Okay.
Were any of those teams not in the original?
Was that 7?
was-
Sorry,
I think it was 7.
I need to work on my listening skills. Here we go.
Villanova.
Bob Long
Villanova.
is broken trivia.
I'm sorry. You know what
Georgetown.
you're missing is Villanova was not an original. Villanova was added a year later. I'm sorry. So Villanova. So Big East started in 1979 with 7 schools. I'm sorry. That was confusion there.
That's right.
And Villanova was added as the 8th school the following year, and then Pittsburgh in 1982. I believe the one team you're missing are the Boston College Golden Eagles.
Yeah.
But so there were 7 teams, and then Villanova was added in 1980. So against which original Big East school, so the 7 that were in the conference when Villanova joined, does Villanova has the highest all-time winning percentage?
Gotcha. I'm ready. I am ready.
I didn't really need a pad of paper to write this on.
That's
and,
true.
And remember to make a guess of what that winning percentage
Yep,
might be.
gotcha. We're ready to go.
Wait, what the winning?
Just
Should we
make-
give
make a
time
guess.
for the audience on this one? Well, they can go. So the original Big East team that Villanova has the highest winning percentage against,
All
and what
time,
is that
yes.
percentage? I'm ready. The music has stopped.
To be fair, we were discussing it while that song was going on for quite a while.
Yes.
I'm ready to go, though.
So I will introduce the answer by saying that in the teams that Villanova is playing against this week, Georgetown and UConn, Villanova all-time is 37-43 against the Georgetown Hoyas, 46% winning percentage, and against the UConn Huskies, 33-31. So just a barely winning percentage of 52%. So neither of those are the teams, as you would hope, seeing those winning percentages. Before I give the answer, what are your guesses?
Yeah, I might be a little high on this percentage, but I'm feeling confident. They haven't won. It's actually been their toughest matchup recently, but I think that they've beaten Seton Hall at a clip of about 80%.
Okay, Seton Hall Pirates.
I had a similar guess. I guess Seton Hall as well.
That is similar.
It's very, very similar with a
In fact, it might
slightly
be the exact
dissimilar
same.
winning percentage. I give them about a 75% winning percentage.
All right. Well, you were correct, Bob, to say that Seton Hall has been close as of late. I have the Wildcats winning 8 of the last 4 meetings with the Pirates. However, the Seton Hall matchup is I'm sorry, what did I say?
8 of the last 4.
I'm sorry, 8 of the last 12. They're 8-4.
Oh,
sorry,
gotcha. Okay.
8-4 in the last 12. Thanks for correcting me. And 72-41 overall.
Oh, you
against Seton Hall for a 63% winning percentage.
That's
However,
not it, though.
that
There's
is
no
not the
way.
most.
There's no way that's the highest.
Villanova's best winning percentage against an original Big East program is against Boston College. They have played Boston College 76 times and have won 52 to 24 of those 76 meetings with a 68% overall winning percentage against Boston College.
Wow.
It's a good question.
Just another little tidbit. So Georgetown, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the programs that Villanova does not have a winning record against. There are 3 other programs, that being Syracuse Orange, Pitt Panthers, and St. John's Red Storm.
Yeah, I think I would have gotten all 3 of those. That makes sense. St. John's is one, if you're thinking now, you're thinking that's crazy because they've owned them for the last decade and a half. But, I mean, truly, that program was amazing for a long time, as well as Georgetown. And then Pitt, they didn't play them for quite as long, but for the entirety of the time that Pitt was in the Big East, from send it in Jerome to Levance Fields, that team was good for just about every single year and was always a tough trip to Pittsburgh for the Villanova Wildcats.
And I did have a second question, which won't take nearly as long, which is simply, so not counting Pitt, because Pitt wasn't one of the original Big East teams before Villanova joined. Villanova, in their last meeting against each of the original Big East programs that they've played, they've won in their last game against those teams, against every program. So the most recent time they've played these programs, they've won against every team but one.
Butler.
No, original.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's too easy.
That would be the original Big East programs. Which of the original Big East programs was the last and only team to beat Villanova in the team's last meeting?
In the team's last meeting. In the team's last.
You really need to write this down?
I'm just thinking here.
Didn't think I needed to put the music back on for this one.
Hold on.
I mean, realistically, there's no way to actually sit down and figure this out unless you have a photographic memory.
No, I'm just trying to think.
I'm not trying to underestimate you here.
Do you
Bob,
want me to
but
give you a hint?
So, no, I don't.
Okay.
It wasn't Georgetown.
I have a guess, and it's purely that.
What's a guess?
My guess is this is a trick question. It's Boston College.
No, no, it's not Boston College.
I saw that coming.
Actually, the last game that Villanova played against Boston College was that Sweet 16 matchup in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm. The last game that Villanova played against Syracuse looked like it was going to be a loss, but Villanova tied that game, took it to overtime, and won the game. So
That's
it wasn't
right,
Syracuse.
at the Wells Fargo Center.
Connecticut. When was the last time they played Connecticut? I don't remember the last time they played Connecticut. So I'm going to guess that it's them.
It's a shame that you can't remember, because my hint was going to be that the game is a pretty memorable one. Well, I guess if you're a Villanova fan, it's not. Good guess. It's one you don't want to remember.
2
It
versus
is
7.
Shabazz Napier.
Oh, yeah.
2014 in the second round of the NCAA
Yeah, that's right.
tournament.
So
That's good.
yeah, so it was a lucky guess. Just
There you
tried to. It's deductive reasoning, trying to figure out all the other games.
So
Anyway,
just
it's
some
good
fun.
discussion,
Good
man.
fun.
So they play Georgetown and then they play UConn. What are you guys' thoughts on these games before we get out of here for the night?
I think we're going to have to see a lot of Omari Spellman in the next week here. Georgetown and UConn both have a lot of bigs. Jesse Govin, Marcus Derrickson, a lot of good players for Georgetown. Jalen Adams, Terry Larrier, Christian Vital for the UConn Huskies. A lot of big guys, grab a lot of boards. We definitely need our front court to step up in these games. So look to see a lot of Eric Paschal working down low, see Omari Spellman, and look to see Demir Cosby-Roundtree working into that rotation a little more.
How many men? How many men? Jesse Govan is really a fun player, and he's a guy that came in under John Thompson III, and you see him on the center of your screen right now, number 15, a 6'10 center. He provides a lot of matchup issues and actually had a real nice game against Syracuse. He's averaging a shade under 18 a game and just impacts the game in so many ways. So he'll be a tough matchup for Omari Spellman and or Eric Paschal when they need to. We mentioned the bigs not really having too many issues with foul trouble recently. Eric Paschal's had a few games where he just kind of gets ahead of himself defensively and has gotten himself in foul trouble. By and large, Omari's had a game here and there, but he's been pretty good there. Jesse Govan's going to provide a lot of issues for this team. And then, remember, this is still a pretty young Georgetown team. Javon Blair, a freshman guard. And this is a team that under I almost said John Thompson III, under Patrick Ewing, is starting to develop its own identity. They had a woefully weak non-conference schedule. Perhaps that gave them an opportunity in a stress and pressure-free environment to learn a little something about themselves. They're working their way into that middle of the pack here in the Big East, but clearly a big game for them. They're mixing up their defensive and their offensive looks from what John Thompson III had. A little more of a free and open game, and I think that'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think the Georgetown game will be a fun game to watch. As you both have touched on, it will be a game where the Wildcats will be tested inside for probably the first time really this season. Didn't get to play those Purdue Boilermakers in the Bahamas. Jesse Govan, averaging 17.6 points a game and over 11 rebounds with almost 1.5 blocks per game. He's a good player. He'll be difficult to handle inside. And looking at that game, one team stat that stands out, talking about the bigs again, is the rebound advantage that Georgetown might have, averaging 41 rebounds per game to Villanova's 35. It's sort of the opposite. Looking at the Connecticut game, Villanova has the edge in almost every statistical category going into that game, and it really should not be a problem. I don't know how much of a home court advantage Connecticut will have. Villanova always seems to play well on the road. They talk about the road attitude. They even say, and Jay has even said in the past, that road games, are almost easier than home games because guys are just with the team. They're on the road. It's a business trip type environment. There aren't the distractions that you might have when you're at home going to classes. What a drag. And but anyway, I expect Villanova to win that game and win that game handily. The Georgetown game, I think, will be a closer game than some might expect.
I think both games are 15-point affairs. Villanova running away with it. St. John's came at a weird time for them in between the Georgetown game and of course, the game against Xavier when they absolutely cleaned up on that team. I think it'll be very interesting, though, heading into a couple road games here, what Villanova can do. And I think it'll be really, really interesting to see how they handle 3 straight on the road, and I think they'll step up. Early tip tomorrow, so it's 6:30 p.m. your time to catch up with the Cats and watch them against Georgetown. And, if I could here before we get out of here, give me this here, too. Give me this. These guys also got a big one coming up. Las Águilas of Philadelphia. So, guys, what do you think about the Philadelphia Eagles game? They're going to take on the Minnesota Vikings in what was an absolutely thrilling game as Minnesota. They took down New Orleans with Stephon Diggs scoring at the horn. Absolutely unbelievable finish, one of the best you'll ever see. Tonight, or I should say that night on Sunday, I actually think I like the Eagles. Had a long, impassioned debate off air with some coworkers, explaining why Philadelphia was not actually a favorite in this game. They strongly believe that they should be. I think it's totally fair that they're not, but 3.5 can kind of go either way, and I like the Eagles to squeak one on Sunday.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I really think that they got a better draw by getting the Vikings instead of the Saints. You know, Drew Brees is not someone I want to see in an NFC Championship game. You know, Case Keenum certainly had a much better year this year. He's much improved. But, you know, at this stage of the game, you know, talking with a lot of people, you don't usually see the level of quarterback play this late that you're seeing right now. You know, I can't remember the last time I've seen a Nick Foles or a Case Keenum or a Blake Bortles in an AFC or NFC Championship game, let alone all three at the same time. So
I'm so glad you said that. Wingo and Golick this morning, and this won't take long. They start asking the question, are we overvaluing having that true franchise quarterback? Is it really just the defense? You know, is it that important to spend $25 million a year on a quarterback, or can you do it with a Bortles, with a Foles, with a Keenum? Because, you know, look at the three guys. I cannot believe they brought that up. I cannot believe that they brought that up. In the AFC, since the year, what was it, 2001? There's only four now. 4 quarterbacks that have gone to the Super Bowl. Their names? Brady, Manning, Ben Roethlisberger. Each of them have gone multiple times. The only other guy to break up that trio over the last 15-plus years is Joe Elite Flacco. So don't tell me. I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke conversation. I wish those guys the best luck with their new show, of course. But I can't believe we're talking about that on Championship Week. I cannot believe it. Tom?
That's a tough act to follow, but I'm going to say go Birds. I completely agree with Kevin. The Saints are a much more complete team in my mind than the Minnesota Vikings. The Eagles, I think any questions they had on offense this week were answered. The Vikings, of course, I think will be a much more difficult test. I mean, the Minnesota Vikings defense I'm talking about. However, the Falcons were a defense that was much improved, especially from their Super Bowl run last year. And people understandably had a lot of questions about Nick Foles and co. going into this past week. But I think the offense continues with the momentum. And, as Kevin also said, you'd much rather see Casey Keenum in the Vikings offense than Drew Brees and the New Orleans Saints offense. And I think our defense, which has been strong for most of the year, will continue to be strong. They shut down Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and the high-flying Atlanta Falcons this past week, and I think they do the same this week. Go Birds.
Yeah, this is going to be a defensive struggle this weekend. You know, if the over-under is 30 right now, I might stick with the under. You know, these are two of the strongest defensive teams in the NFL right now. Two not necessarily struggling quarterbacks, but, you know, Case Keenum doing a little better than Nick Foles right now. Who knows who comes out there. You know you're going to stay in this game if you're the Eagles. You know, Vikings aren't going to run away with this. Your defense is going to keep you in, and same thing for the Vikings. Their defense is going to keep them in any game. This is going to come down to the last possession, and I'm really excited to see this game. It's going to be one of the best defensive battles we've seen in a while.
Should be exciting. So, Villanova, they play on Wednesday, and then they play on Saturday, and then you can turn the clock to Sunday and watch the Eagles in the NFC Championship game against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, of course, you have to build into your plans an absolutely enormous high school basketball game on Friday night as LaSalle hosts Archbishop Wood, last year's 5A state champion and this year's favorite to win the Philadelphia Catholic League. 4 Division I players on that team. And what is it? It is Silent Night at LaSalle, bred of Taylor University, where the players will be playing essentially on a soundless floor, just the squeak of the shoes and the bounce of the basketball, while the rest of the crowd remains silent in the stands around them until the 10th point is scored, at which point absolute pandemonium will erupt. They'll have to stop the game because of the pandemonium and perhaps the folks coming onto the floor. Wonderful tradition. Be part of it on Friday night, 7 o'clock on BLS, and maybe by 7:12 or so, you're seeing that pandemonium live on your computer screen or your mobile device.
So are you going to be silent, Bob?
Ooh, you're right. They're not going to just hear the squeak of the shoes and the bounce of the ball. They're going to hear the squeak of the shoes, the bounce of the ball, And the commentary of Bob Long and Joe winning doesn't add to the ambiance, trust me. But it should be
I also
fun.
can't wait to see what outfit you end up wearing on Friday night, Bob.
Yeah, we'll have to see. It will be a surprise. But
Tune in. Yeah.
well, this has been fun, guys. I've enjoyed it. For Kevin Long, to the far right on your camera, my left, Tom right in the middle, both on the camera and to my vision, and me, Bob Long. We're saying so long here from Philadelphia. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next Tuesday for more Villanova Basketball Report.